See, it's 9 minutes to a daily close in Bitcoin, and first and foremost, the first thing I wanted to say about Bitcoin really is the fact, well, just for people who haven't watched me before, I know that probably we've got most people here who have watched me, but this is kind of a base analysis, and this is what I do every video. On the weekly chart, what am I expecting to happen for Bitcoin over the kind of medium to long time frame? That's very clear, right? This is what I'm expecting to happen for Bitcoin. I'm expecting Bitcoin to trend downwards towards the 200-week SMA, okay? That is this green line here, okay? And basically, whenever you, in cryptocurrency, in Bitcoin, so I'm a little bit frambly this morning, whenever you reach and whenever you drop below the 50-week SMA, right, which is this red line here, you ultimately end up at the 200 SMA, which is the green line, within about 6 months, okay? That happened in 2013, and we ended up at the 200 SMA after the drop below the red line, the 50-week, in 2014. We ended up at around 6 months later, okay? 2017, same thing. We dropped below this in around May, and we ended up at the 200-week in around December. So that's about 7 months there, okay? And now currently, we've dropped below the 50-week here in December, and we're going to be ending up at the 200, in my personal opinion. According to my previous chart here, I'll bring it up in a second. Here we go. As soon as, let's jump over to the daily chart, and this might actually surprise a lot of people if you haven't listened to my recent content, as soon as March. And you might be thinking, well, March is very soon, right? March is only, just a month away, and, mid-March, I'm looking at that region. So when we reach that, that 200-week SMA, which I think is basically, pretty likely at this point. I mean, I've been calling for this. I've got a person in there saying, first time watching a stream, I've been calling for this since 60K. And so we've dropped all the way down to 33K, almost halved in value since my first call. Dropped below the 50-week, dropped below Ikamoku Cloud on the weekly, Gaussian channel on the weekly. Basically, a lot of things have been lost. I've been calling for it since 60K, and now we're all the way down to 33K. I would say that it's very likely that we reach this 200-week SMA. And my first kind of scenario, now here's the thing, I'd say it's likely, but I don't know the time frame. So my first scenario, my kind of favored scenario here as of right now, due to the fact that trend is your friend, is Bitcoin just keeps trending downwards in this channel, right? And if it does that, it will reach the 200-week in March. Now, there obviously is the possibility, and the strong possibility at that, to be analyzed, in which we break out of this channel to the upside, and that would be this orange scenario. Now, this breakout could happen here. Okay, could actually happen on this move right now. Although I would kind of argue that it wouldn't do that because of I don't think the chart looks good right now in the daily. We'll get into that in a second. But this orange scenario would suggest that, hey, we break out, we come back up to say 48K. It's just speculation there because that's my invalidation point. And then around mid-March, we're going to have a Federal Reserve meeting about interest rates. The Federal Reserve has kind of claimed that they're going to be raising interest rates in March. And if they do that, that would cause a market correction. Most likely, it's not guaranteed, but it's most likely to cause a market correction. Because as you guys, maybe you don't know, I'll explain it to you. Interest rates, okay, so basically, if you have low interest rates, it encourages market growth, but inflation is basically allowed to run rampant, okay? If you have high interest rates, it encourages kind of bringing down inflation or stabilizing inflation, but the market growth is minimalized, or even sometimes we go into actual full recessions. And so, financial recessions. And so, look, if the Fed raises interest rates in March, like they said they're going to do, there is definitely a chance we could enter a massive market correction in traditional markets. As you would know, traditional markets and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency markets are very much linked. And so if we do enter that correction on the traditional markets, which we will look at later in this live stream, we could be seeing a large correction on Bitcoin. And that would be this scenario here in which we enter a recession here, and then not a recession, but we enter a correction at least, and then we see Bitcoin tank because the financial markets are kind of tanking. And so it is worth noting that the only reason, if you haven't looked at the S&P 500, so that's just going over my base prediction there. If you haven't looked at the S&P 500, or the SPX as it's called on TradingView, okay, you will notice that this thing has been uptrending literally non-stop since the COVID correction, and before that, I mean, this thing just doesn't stop, doesn't it? I mean, that's going back all the way to 2008 in the housing crisis in America, right? So look, this thing's been uptrending for basically 14 years, minus like the 2-month correction we had with the COVID drop. And so this is obviously unsustainable, and this obviously doesn't reflect the actual economy itself. I mean, stocks have never really claimed to reflect the economy at a very base level. You could say they do, but not at all. I mean, the American economy is basically overrun here. It's tanking. It's inflation's going crazy. The debt ceilings being raised every 2 seconds. It doesn't look good. And so when you look at the S&P 500, the SPX, you basically see the difference or the differentiation between the economy and the stock market. This is a very unsustainable upwards trend. Now, what I would say about this, and we'll just flip back over to Bitcoin in a second to go over when I think Bitcoin's going to bottom. I said March in one scenario, but I didn't go over my second scenario fully. Looking at this right now on the daily chart, we can see that we've actually seen a pretty substantial correction already. And this was due to the fact that people were fearing that the Federal Reserve was going to raise interest rates. And we saw a 12% correction just because people were fearing they were going to do that. Now, I want you guys to imagine, what if they actually did that? And that's what we're going to be doing in March. So a 12% correction just because people think they might. What about when they do? All right, we're looking at probably 30%. Okay, and if we see a 30% correction from this price point, I don't know where the price is going to be in March when we see this happen, but let's just say it happens from here. We're looking at the stocks going all the way back to 3,000 on the S&P 500, which is basically levels we saw in June and July in 2020. We're looking at a substantial correction, and we are due for one, trust me. And we should not be moving up this quickly. So, let's see what happens there. But we'll go into that a bit more in depth later, especially when there's more people in the chat too. But ultimately, what I wanted to cover here, just wrapping up my prediction here. So essentially, just I know I've got a couple of people in here who have just said first time watching the stream. I think we're going to head down to a 200-week SMA, and my invalidation point for that prediction, because you have to have invalidation points. So this is the point in which if we break, I'll be bullish again. Is 48k, which is the top of this red box. That's because bull market support, Ikomoku, and Gaussian channel is all in that region, and the 50 and the 200-day SMAs are all in that region. So if we break 48k, we're breaking all of those things, and we're also breaking critical resistance. So let me just say, I think we're heading to a 200-week. If we break 48k, that's going to invalidate that whole prediction, and I think we'll be heading upwards. So as for when we will bottom in the second scenario, now I've already said that in the first scenario in March, I think the bottom will be in March. So the yellow scenario, I think the bottom will be in March. If that happens, if we stay within this channel, which is a pretty likely possibility, right? And if we do break out of a channel, this is speculation as to how the break would look, this orange scenario. But if we do that and then we get rejected at 48k, right? The scenario would be we'd bottom out between April and November. And you might be thinking, why April and November? Well, April, because it's just after March, okay? That's just, kind of random speculation there. But November is kind of a more interesting one. Why do I say November? November's a long time away. And November is said here. The reason why I talk about November is because November is looking at the 4-year cycle theory. Okay, and as I've said previously, you might be inclined to believe if you were in cryptocurrency market in 2021 and you listen to all the crypto YouTubers, you might be inclined to believe that the 4-year cycle theory actually doesn't exist anymore. I would disagree with that. Now, there's a lot of people who would disagree with me, and I'm sure many of them are in this chat right now, but I would disagree. I think the 4-year cycle theory is still very much prominent. And the reason being is because of this strong connection and the strong kind of trend of numbers repeating themselves over time. So, if we're talking about lengthening cycles from the halving, that's probably happened, right? But lengthening cycles at a base level is very up for interpretation. And this is my interpretation of it. So what I think we've seen here on Bitcoin and what has actually happened is 1,400 days from the 2013 top to the 2017 top. We've also seen 1,400 days from the 2017 top to the 2021 top. That implies that's if you think the top is in. I personally do. Okay, so that's two 1,400s. Then we can go ahead and see from the bottom in 2015 to the top to the bottom in 2018, we saw that number again, 1,400. So that's 3 separate times that number's come up. And then if we're looking at it a bit deeper, we can see from the bottom in 2015 to the top in 2018 or 2017, we can see 1,064 days exactly. The same thing happened here. The bottom in 2019 to the top in 2021, 1,064 days. So that is 5 kind of separate kind of points there in which numbers are coming up that are just repeating themselves. And in order for that to be a coincidence, we're looking at a very, very small percentage chance. And so how do I get to that November prediction is the original question. That November prediction kind of assumes this trend continues going and assumes that from the 2018 bottom to the bottom this year, we're looking at 1,400 days, and hence that would be November, okay? November later this year. But looking at what's happening with the market right now, looking at what's happening with interest rates specifically and the Federal Reserve and what they're doing and how quickly the market is going down, I would say that that's seeming unlikely. Even though that trend has played out for basically a decade now, I'm saying it's seeming unlikely could still happen. You know, November's possible, but looking at the chart, November is all the way, let's extend this yellow box to November, all the way down here. Okay, and for Bitcoin to take, you know, that long, we're looking at like 9-10 months. For Bitcoin to take that long to reach 25k, it's already at 37. It seems a little bit ridiculous, but we have to stick by what's happening, and the 4-year cycle is telling us that, and so we're going to keep it there until it gets invalidated, right? But ultimately what I'm saying is the earliest we could reach that region is March. Now, you guys will probably know this. A lot of you who watch my videos will probably know this, but I was just clarifying that for some people who hadn't. So we'll look into Bitcoin